The Power of Manifestation. Think bigger, live better, achieve more. Written and published by Rising Audiobook. Introduction. What if your life is not happening to you, but through you? Why do two people with the same opportunities end up living completely different realities? Could your thoughts be silently shaping your future without you realizing it? Is manifestation a mystery or a hidden pattern already controlling your life? What if everything you believe about yourself is either building your success or blocking it? Somewhere in a quiet city, a man works hard for years but remains stuck in the same position, while another person with similar skills rises quickly, without extra effort, without privilege, without luck. The difference is not the world around them, but the world within them. And this is where the hidden force of manifestation begins to reveal itself. It is not magic, and it is not imagination alone, but a quiet alignment between belief, attention, and action. Once you understand this, you never see your life the same way again. Because every thought you think, every choice you make, and every belief you hold is quietly shaping the future you are walking into right now. Today we are going to uncover how to direct that force consciously and transform not just your results, but your entire reality from the inside out. Stay with this journey, because everything you thought you knew is about to change. Chapter 1. The Invisible Force Shaping Your Life. There are moments in life when nothing obvious seems wrong, and yet everything feels stuck. You wake up, you try again, you push a little harder than yesterday, you follow the same steps you were told should work, and still, something quietly resists you. Not in a dramatic way, not with failure that screams, but with results that never fully arrive, and most people never question it. They assume life is random. They assume success is about timing, effort, or talent. But beneath all of that, there is something far more silent operating in the background, an invisible force that shapes how you think, how you choose, and eventually how you live. That force is not outside of you. It begins within you. Your thoughts are not just passing moments in your mind. They are instructions, quiet signals that guide your attention, your behavior, and your interpretation of reality. What you repeatedly think eventually becomes the lens through which you see the world. And once that lens is formed, it starts deciding what you believe is possible for you and what is not. Two people can look at the exact same situation and see entirely different truths. One sees opportunity, the other sees limitation. One moves forward, the other holds back. Not because reality is different, but because perception is different. And perception is shaped by belief. Beliefs are powerful because they don't just influence what you think, they influence what you notice. If you believe you are not smart enough, your mind will quietly highlight every mistake you make and ignore every success you achieve. If you believe opportunities are rare, you will walk past possibilities without even recognizing them. Your mind is always filtering the world to match what it already believes is true. Over time, this filtering becomes your reality. Expectations take this even further. Before you take any action, your expectations are already predicting the outcome. You may not realize it, but before you speak in a meeting, apply for a job, or start something new, a quiet voice inside has already decided whether you will succeed or fail. And that expectation subtly changes your confidence, your effort, and even your body language. This is how life begins to follow an invisible script. Manifestation is not something that suddenly appears out of nowhere. It begins long before results are visible. It begins in the private world of thought, where no one else can see what you are rehearsing internally. Because what you consistently think, believe, and expect eventually becomes the foundation of what you experience externally. Consider a simple example. A student carries the belief, "I am weak in studies." At first it feels harmless, just a thought, just a label. But slowly, that belief changes behavior. The student avoids difficult subjects, stops asking questions in class, studies less for challenging topics, and feels anxious before exams. Over time, the results begin to reflect the belief. Poor performance appears, and now the belief feels proven. What started as a thought has become a cycle, but the truth is, The belief created the behavior, and the behavior created the result. This is how the invisible force operates, not loudly, but consistently, not instantly, but repeatedly. And once you begin to see this clearly, something shifts inside you. You realize that your life is not simply responding to effort alone, it is responding to the internal story you carry about yourself while you are making that effort. The mind is always listening, always shaping, always building a version of reality that matches your inner world. So the real question is not whether manifestation is real. The real question is, what are you unconsciously manifesting every single day without even noticing it? Because before anything changes outside of you, something must first change within you. Chapter 2. Think bigger than your circumstances. Most people do not fail because they are incapable of success. They fail because they quietly accept a smaller version of their life without ever questioning it. At some point, life begins to feel like a boundary rather than a journey. Your job defines your possibilities, your income defines your choices, your surroundings define your expectations. And without even realizing it, you start negotiating with life instead of expanding it. But here is something most people never hear clearly enough. Your current reality is not your final limit. It is only a snapshot of where your thinking has taken you so far. The mind has a strange habit. It adjusts to circumstances and then begins to believe those circumstances are permanent. When life is small, thinking becomes small. When opportunities are limited, imagination quietly shrinks to match them. Over time, you stop dreaming beyond what is familiar, not because dreams are impossible, but because they feel unfamiliar. This is how limiting beliefs are formed, not through dramatic failure, but through repeated acceptance. Someone grows up hearing, "People like us don't become successful." Another person is told, "Be realistic," and slowly, these sentences settle into identity. They don't stay as words anymore. They become invisible rules that guide decisions. You may never say them out loud, but you begin to live as if they are true, and once a belief becomes internal truth, it starts shrinking your future before it even arrives. You stop applying for opportunities because you assume rejection. You stop trying new paths because you assume failure. You stop imagining bigger outcomes because they feel not for you. This is how potential quietly disappears, not in one moment, but in thousands of small decisions shaped by unseen limits. But manifestation begins the moment you break that pattern, because vision always expands before results appear. No success story begins with visible proof. It begins with imagination that refuses to accept current conditions as final. Every transformation starts internally, in a space where nothing has changed yet, but everything is already being redefined. When a person begins to think beyond their circumstances, something powerful happens. Their attention shifts. They start noticing possibilities they previously ignored. They start asking different questions. Instead of "Why is this my life?" they begin to ask, "What if something more is possible?" And that question changes everything. Consider a simple but powerful example. A worker in a low-income job repeats the same routine every day. The income is limited, the environment is predictable, and the future feels fixed. But inside his mind, a different thought begins to grow, quiet at first, almost unrealistic. He starts imagining owning a business, not because his situation supports it, but because something inside him refuses to stay small forever. At first, nothing in his life changes. The job remains the same, the income remains the same, even the people around him may doubt the idea. But internally, something has shifted. He starts learning, he starts observing, he starts paying attention to people who have already done what he dreams of doing, and slowly, that vision begins to reshape his behavior. This is the hidden beginning of transformation, not opportunity arriving, but thinking expanding. Growth never begins when life becomes easier. It begins when your thinking refuses to stay inside the limits of your current environment. The moment you start imagining a life bigger than what you are living, you begin separating your identity from your circumstances, and that separation is powerful. because circumstances are temporary, but vision is directional. It pulls you forward even when the present does not support it. It challenges comfort. It disrupts routine. It creates tension between where you are and where you believe you can go, and that tension is not a problem. It is the beginning of change. Thinking bigger does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to let reality become your ceiling. It means understanding that your present situation is informative, not final. It shows you where you are, but it does not decide where you can go. Every major transformation in life begins with someone daring to think beyond what they were given, beyond what they were told, beyond what they have experienced so far. And once that shift happens, life stops being something you simply live through. It becomes something you begin to shape. Chapter 3. The Power of Clear Intention. A wish without clarity is like a ship sailing without a compass, moving, but never truly arriving anywhere meaningful. Many people spend years wanting a better life. They want success, they want happiness, they want freedom. Yet their lives remain unchanged, not because they lack effort, but because they lack direction. Desire alone is not enough to create transformation. Without clarity, even the strongest desire dissolves into confusion. This is where intention becomes powerful, because intention does something desire alone cannot. It gives shape to your thoughts. It turns something abstract into something focused. And the moment your mind becomes focused, your life begins to reorganize around that focus. Vague goals create vague results. When someone says, "I want to be successful," the mind has no clear instruction. Success could mean anything: more money, better job, respect, freedom. It remains undefined. And because the mind does not know what to aim at, it spreads energy in every direction without impact. But when clarity enters, everything changes. I want to earn $5,000 per month through a skill-based career within 2 years. Now the mind has direction. It knows what to look for. It begins to filter opportunities differently. It starts noticing relevant information. It begins to prioritize actions that align with that specific outcome. Clarity is not just a motivational idea. It is a neurological shift. The brain responds more strongly to defined targets because it can measure progress against them. Without a clear target, effort becomes scattered. With a clear target, effort becomes focused. This is why intention is not just about wanting something. It is about defining it so precisely that your mind can no longer ignore it. When intention becomes clear, it stops being a dream and starts becoming a direction. Think about how different life feels when you know exactly what you are working toward. Your decisions become easier. You stop wasting time on distractions that do not align with your goal. You start saying no more often, not out of limitation, but out of clarity, because clarity naturally creates boundaries, and those boundaries protect your energy. Most people are not stuck because they lack ability. They are stuck because their attention is divided among too many unclear desires. They want change, but they are not specific about what kind of change. So their effort never accumulates in one direction long enough to create momentum. But the moment intention becomes specific, something shifts internally. You begin to feel a subtle seriousness toward your life. Not pressure, but purpose. You are no longer just reacting to circumstances. You are directing them. Even your imagination becomes sharper. You start picturing details instead of general ideas. You see yourself in situations more clearly. You think in outcomes, not wishes. And that is when manifestation begins to accelerate, because the mind responds best to clarity. It is like planting a seed in fertile soil versus scattering seeds across empty ground. One has direction, depth, and potential for growth. The other is lost in randomness. Clear intention gathers your mental energy into one focused point. And over time, that focus begins to shape your decisions, your habits and your actions without forcing them. You are no longer trying to figure out life in general. You are building something specific. And once you experience the power of clarity, confusion becomes uncomfortable. You stop entertaining vague desires because they feel unproductive. You begin to respect precision in your thinking. You start understanding that the quality of your life is deeply connected to the quality of your intention, because life does not respond to what you loosely want. It responds to what you clearly define. And in that clarity, the path forward begins to reveal itself, not all at once, but step by step, shaped by every focused decision you make. Chapter 4. Becoming the person who can receive it. Before life changes on the outside, something far more subtle must change on the inside. Not your circumstances, not your environment, not even your opportunities. You. There is a quiet truth most people overlook in their pursuit of success. You cannot consistently hold a life that your identity does not support. Even when you accidentally reach it, you will struggle to keep it. It will feel unfamiliar, unstable, almost like you are living someone else's reality, because identity always wins over desire. You may want success deeply. You may visualize it, plan for it, even work for it. But if your self-image still belongs to someone who doubts, delays, or avoids discipline, then every new opportunity will eventually collide with your internal limits. And without realizing it, you will pull yourself back into what feels normal. This is why manifestation is not just about attraction, it is about alignment. You do not simply attract what you want, you sustain what you become, and becoming is where the real transformation begins. Your identity is the silent foundation behind every action you take. It decides what feels natural to you and what feels forced. It determines what you repeat daily and what you abandon when things become uncomfortable. Even your habits are not random. They are reflections of how you see yourself. A person who sees themselves as disciplined does not constantly negotiate with effort. A person who sees themselves as capable does not hesitate at every challenge. Their actions flow from identity, not motivation. This is why behavior alone cannot create lasting change. Behavior is only the surface, identity is the root. And when the root remains unchanged, the pattern always returns. You may have experienced this in your own life. Moments where you tried to change new routines, new goals, new ambitions, but something eventually pulled you back. Not because you lacked intelligence or ability, but because your identity was still anchored in your old version of yourself. This is the invisible resistance most people never understand. They try to build a new life while still carrying the identity of an old one. But manifestation requires alignment, not just between thoughts and actions, but between who you believe you are and what you are trying to become. When alignment happens, effort becomes natural, discipline stops feeling like punishment, growth stops feeling like struggle. Because you are no longer forcing behavior, you are expressing identity. And this is where transformation begins to shift from external effort to internal evolution. Imagine someone who wants success, but still behaves like a person who avoids responsibility. They postpone tasks, they wait for motivation, they doubt their consistency. Every time they try to move forward, their old identity quietly pulls them back into comfort. Nothing changes, not because the goal is wrong, but because the identity remains unchanged. Now imagine the same person beginning to think differently. Instead of asking, "How do I force myself to be disciplined?" they begin asking, "What would a disciplined version of me do right now?" That small shift changes everything, because now they are no longer fighting themselves. They are becoming someone new. Identity transformation does not happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in repeated choices. Every time you act differently from your old self, you weaken the old identity. Every time you choose discipline over delay, clarity over confusion, or action over avoidance, you reinforce a new one. Slowly, quietly, your self-image begins to shift. And once your identity shifts, your behavior follows without resistance. This is the deepest level of manifestation, not attracting something external, but becoming internally compatible with it. Because life does not simply give you what you want. It responds to who you are, and when who you are begins to change, Everything that surrounds you begins to reorganize around that change. This is why real transformation always feels personal before it becomes visible. It is not the world changing first. It is you becoming someone the world responds to differently. And in that becoming, you stop chasing a new life. You start living as it. Chapter 5. Seeing the future before it exists. Long before anything becomes real in your life, it first becomes familiar in your mind. Not as a coincidence, not as luck, but as repetition. There is a quiet space inside every person where the future is already being rehearsed. It is not physical yet, not visible yet, not confirmed by reality, but it is being shaped through imagination. And whether you realize it or not, your mind is constantly stepping into versions of tomorrow, long before they arrive. Some people call it daydreaming, others dismiss it as imagination, but in truth, it is one of the most powerful tools shaping human behavior, the ability to mentally experience what does not yet exist. Because the mind does not always distinguish clearly between what is real and what is vividly imagined. When you repeatedly picture a situation, your brain begins to respond as if it has already happened. It starts building familiarity. It starts adjusting your emotions. It starts preparing your reactions. And slowly, what once felt distant begins to feel possible. This is where visualization becomes more than imagination. It becomes preparation. But most people visualize incorrectly. They see the outcome briefly, then return to their current reality unchanged. A passing thought, not a lived experience. And because there is no emotional depth, the mind treats it as entertainment, not direction. True visualization is different. It is not just seeing the future, it is stepping into it emotionally. It is waking up in your mind as the person you are becoming. It is feeling the confidence before it exists externally. It is experiencing the relief, the pride, the stability, the success, not as fantasy, but as internal rehearsal. And the more emotionally real it becomes, the more your brain begins to accept it as a future that belongs to you. This is why athletes spend time mentally rehearsing their performance. Before they step onto the field, they have already played the game in their mind thousands of times. Their body responds faster, not just because of physical training, but because the experience is already familiar internally. The brain responds strongly to imagined experience, because it is built to learn through repetition. Whether the repetition comes from reality or imagination, the impact on your neural pathways is similar. The mind begins to prepare for what it believes will happen, and this is where transformation begins quietly. Because when your mind has already lived a future version of yourself often enough, your present behavior begins to adjust automatically. You start making choices that align with that internal vision. You start rejecting actions that do not match it. You begin moving as if that version of you already exists, because in your mind it does. Visualization is not about escaping reality. It is about training your perception of reality before it arrives. But the most powerful element of visualization is emotion. Without emotion, vision remains distant. With emotion, it becomes magnetic. Think about a moment in your life that felt deeply real, not because it lasted long, but because it felt intense. Your brain remembers emotional experiences more clearly than neutral ones. That is because emotion anchors memory. It gives meaning. It creates imprint. So when you visualize your future, the question is not just what do I see? It is what do I feel? Do you feel calm in your success? Do you feel confident in your actions? Do you feel free in your choices? Do you feel proud of who you have become? Because those feelings are not just imagination, they are direction. They tell your mind what to move toward. And over time, your brain begins to organize your behavior around those emotional targets. This is why people often notice something strange when they start visualizing consistently. Their decisions change before their life does. They become more aware of distractions. They become more intentional with time. They start behaving in ways that align with a version of themselves they have not yet physically reached, but already emotionally experienced. That is manifestation in motion, not sudden change. but gradual alignment between inner vision and outer action. And here is the most important part. The mind does not wait for permission to begin this process. It is already doing it, either consciously or unconsciously. Every fear you rehearse, every failure you imagine, every limitation you replay becomes part of your internal programming, just as powerful as positive visualization, but in the opposite direction. This is why awareness matters. Because if you are not consciously directing your imagination, it will default to reinforcing your existing beliefs. But when you take control of it, something shifts. You are no longer reacting to life. You are rehearsing it. And slowly, what you rehearse becomes what you recognize as normal. What once felt impossible starts to feel familiar. And what feels familiar eventually becomes real. So when you close your eyes and see your future self, you are not escaping your present. You are training your mind to recognize the path before you walk it. And in that recognition, the future begins to quietly take shape, long before the world ever sees it. Chapter 6. The Energy of Gratitude and Abundance. There are days when everything feels like it is missing, not because nothing is there, but because the mind is trained to notice what is not. A person can have progress, support, opportunities, and still feel empty inside if their attention is constantly pulled toward what they lack. And in that silent focus on absence, something powerful happens. Life begins to feel smaller than it actually is. This is where gratitude becomes more than a polite habit. It becomes a shift in perception. Gratitude is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about finally seeing what has always been present but overlooked. It pulls your attention away from what is missing and gently redirects it toward what is already working, already supporting you, already holding you together in ways you often forget. And when your focus changes, your experience of life changes with it, because what you focus on expands in your perception, not externally at first, but internally. The mind starts recognizing more of what it previously ignored. Small wins begin to feel meaningful. Simple moments begin to feel valuable. Even challenges begin to look less like punishment and more like part of a larger process. This shift is subtle but powerful. A scarcity mindset trains the mind to constantly ask, "What do I not have?" It creates comparison, dissatisfaction, and quiet frustration. Even when progress is made, it feels insufficient because the reference point is always lack. But an abundance mindset asks a different question. What is already here that I can build from? And that question changes everything. Because now, instead of feeling behind, you begin to feel aware. Instead of feeling deprived, you begin to feel equipped. You start noticing resources you ignored before, skills, time, relationships, opportunities, even lessons hidden inside past failures. Abundance is not about having everything. It is about recognizing that you are not starting from nothing, and that recognition creates emotional stability. When gratitude becomes part of your daily thinking, your emotional world begins to settle. You stop reacting as intensely to every setback, because your mind is no longer anchored only to what is wrong. You develop a sense of balance, not because life becomes easier, but because your perspective becomes wider. This is where manifestation deepens, because emotional stability is what allows consistency. A mind trapped in lack is constantly unstable, moving between desire and frustration, hope and disappointment. But a mind rooted in gratitude has a foundation. It is not shaken as easily by temporary outcomes. It sees progress even in small steps, and that stability becomes fertile ground for growth. Think of two people facing the same situation. One sees only what is missing, the money not earned, the goals not reached, the time not available. Their energy becomes tense, rushed, and scattered. The other acknowledges what is already present, the effort made, the lessons learned, the opportunities still available. Their energy becomes steady, focused, and open. The situation has not changed, but the energy around it has, and energy shapes how people move through their choices. It influences persistence, creativity, and even the ability to notice new paths forward. Gratitude does something even deeper. It trains the mind to trust that life is not only taking from you, but also giving to you in ways you may not immediately recognize. That trust softens resistance, and when resistance softens, flow begins. Opportunities that once felt invisible start becoming noticeable. Conversations become more meaningful. Decisions become less driven by fear and more guided by clarity. You begin to act from a place of sufficiency rather than desperation. This is where abundance becomes real, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. And over time, something subtle happens. The more you practice gratitude, the more your mind automatically scans for what is working instead of what is broken. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means refusing to let problems become your entire reality, because what you consistently notice becomes what you mentally enlarge, and what you mentally enlarge becomes the world you emotionally live in. This is why gratitude is not just emotional comfort, it is mental direction. It quietly tells your mind, there is more here than you think. And when your mind begins to believe that, it starts behaving differently. It becomes more patient, more open, more aware. It stops operating from panic and starts operating from presence. And in that presence, abundance is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you begin to recognize everywhere you look. Chapter 7. Taking aligned action every day. A vision without movement slowly turns into frustration. Not because the vision is wrong, but because life never responds to intention alone. It responds to expression, and expression always requires action, even when the action feels small, uncertain, or imperfect. Many people misunderstand manifestation at this stage. They believe that thinking clearly, visualizing deeply, or feeling emotionally connected is enough to bring change. But the truth is far more grounded. Thought creates direction, but action creates experience. Without experience, nothing in the physical world shifts, and life, at its core, is physical. This is where alignment becomes essential. Aligned action means your daily behavior begins to reflect your inner intention, not in dramatic leaps, but in quiet consistency. It is the bridge between what you imagine and what you live, because a goal that remains only in the mind never fully enters reality. Change does not arrive in a single moment. It arrives through repetition, small decisions that seem insignificant at first, but gradually build a direction powerful enough to reshape a life. Think about momentum. A single step does not feel powerful. It does not change your life instantly. But when you take that step again tomorrow, and again the next day, something begins to accumulate. Not just effort, but direction. And direction repeated becomes momentum. Momentum repeated becomes identity. And identity repeated becomes reality. This is how transformation quietly builds itself. Aligned action is not about doing everything at once. It is about doing what matches your intention consistently, even when motivation fades. Because motivation is unstable, it rises and falls with emotion. But discipline is stable. It continues even when feelings are uncertain, and discipline is where manifestation becomes real. You may want a healthier body, but if your actions do not reflect that desire, nothing changes. You may visualize success, but if your daily habits avoid the work required, success remains distant. You may dream of a different life, but if your behavior remains identical to your current one, your future cannot shift. This is not punishment, it is structure. Life responds to patterns, not promises. Consider someone who deeply desires fitness. They imagine themselves strong, energetic, confident. They see the result clearly in their mind. They feel it emotionally during visualization. But their days remain unchanged. No movement, no training, no effort aligned with that vision. Weeks pass, then months, and the body remains the same, not because the vision was weak, but because the action was missing. Now imagine the same person taking one small step, a short walk, a few exercises, a simple routine repeated daily. At first it feels insignificant, almost too small to matter. But over time something shifts, the body responds, energy increases, confidence grows, and suddenly the vision that once felt distant begins to feel reachable. This is the power of alignment. When action matches intention, reality begins to reorganize itself around consistency. But there is a deeper truth here that most people miss. Action does not just change results, it changes identity. Every action you take is a signal to your mind about who you are. When you act with discipline, you begin to see yourself as disciplined. When you act with consistency, you begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. And once identity shifts, action no longer feels forced. It becomes natural. This is how aligned action creates internal transformation, not just external progress. But the challenge is always the same. Starting is easy in thought, but difficult in reality. The mind resists discomfort. It prefers planning over execution, imagining over doing. Because imagination feels safe, action feels uncertain. Yet nothing changes inside safety. Growth only begins where comfort ends. Aligned action does not require perfection, it requires direction. Even imperfect steps taken consistently carry more power than perfect plans never executed. Because reality does not respond to intention alone, it responds to what you repeatedly do. And repetition is where manifestation becomes tangible. One action becomes a habit becomes a pattern becomes a lifestyle, and a lifestyle becomes your future without needing constant effort. This is why the smallest actions matter more than they appear. They are not just tasks, they are signals. They tell life what direction you are choosing, moment by moment. And slowly, without dramatic shifts, your world begins to adjust. Opportunities appear that match your effort. Confidence grows where hesitation once lived. Progress replaces stagnation, not because life suddenly changed, but because you did. Aligned action is where manifestation stops being theory and becomes experience. Because at the end of every vision, every belief, every intention, there is a simple truth waiting to be lived. Nothing changes until you move. Chapter 8: Overcoming Doubt and Trusting the Process. Progress rarely fails loudly. More often, it slows down quietly, so quietly that you begin to question whether anything is happening at all. This is the moment where doubt enters, not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow erosion of certainty. At first, you feel motivated, focused, and committed. You take action, you stay consistent, you believe in the direction you are moving. But then time passes. Results do not appear as quickly as expected. Effort feels heavier. Silence replaces feedback, and in that silence, the mind starts to speak. Maybe this is not working. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it's too late. Doubt does not arrive because you are failing. It arrives because you are waiting. Waiting for proof. Waiting for signs. Waiting for reassurance that your effort is not wasted. But manifestation does not always provide immediate feedback. It often works beneath the surface first, quietly restructuring circumstances long before visible change appears. And that delay is where most people give up. Because the human mind is not naturally patient with invisible progress, fear enters in the same space. It grows where certainty is missing. It whispers possibilities of failure and magnifies uncertainty. Not because danger is present, but because outcomes are unclear. And when outcomes are unclear, the mind tries to protect itself by imagining worst-case scenarios. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. But emotional resistance is a natural part of growth. Every meaningful transformation carries discomfort, not because something is going wrong, but because something unfamiliar is forming. You are stepping beyond the limits of your previous identity, and anything beyond familiarity feels unstable at first. This instability is often misinterpreted as failure, but in reality, it is transition. Think about someone starting a new path, perhaps a business, a skill, or a long-term goal. In the beginning, everything feels exciting. There is energy, hope, and vision, but after initial effort, results remain small or invisible. Customers do not appear immediately. Recognition does not come quickly. Progress feels slower than expected. And this is where the real test begins. Because now the excitement fades and only belief remains. Many people stop here. They interpret early silence as permanent failure. They assume that because results are not visible, nothing is happening, and so they step back right before momentum begins to form. But those who continue experience something different. Not instantly, but gradually. The same effort that once felt pointless begins to compound. Skills improve, understanding deepens, opportunities slowly emerge. What once felt like delay was actually development. What once felt like silence was actually preparation. Trust is what carries you through this invisible phase. Trust does not mean blind optimism. It means continued movement in the absence of immediate evidence. It is the decision to keep going even when the outcome has not yet revealed itself. And this is where most transformation separates itself from hesitation, because doubt stops movement. Fear slows it, but trust keeps it alive. Trust allows you to stay connected to your vision even when external reality has not yet caught up. It protects your consistency when motivation weakens. It reminds you that absence of results is not proof of absence of progress. And over time, something important becomes clear. The process was never linear. Growth rarely moves in a straight line. It moves in cycles, periods of effort, periods of silence, and then sudden expansion. What looks like nothing happening is often the stage where everything is quietly aligning. But you only see that in hindsight. In the moment, all you feel is uncertainty. And that is where emotional discipline becomes essential. Not the absence of doubt, but the ability to move forward despite it, because doubt is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that you are in unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliar territory is exactly where change happens. The person who eventually succeeds is not the one who never doubts, but the one who continues while doubting, who allows uncertainty to exist without letting it decide their actions, who understands that emotional resistance is part of the path, not proof of being off it. And slowly, something shifts. What once felt uncertain becomes familiar. What once felt delayed begins to show results. What once felt like failure begins to reveal itself as preparation. And in that realization, trust deepens. Not because everything became easy, but because you stayed long enough to see how the process actually unfolds. And once you understand that, you no longer measure progress only by what you see, but also by what you are becoming while you wait. Chapter 9. The Power of Persistence. Not every effort shows its value while you are making it. Some actions feel powerful in the moment, full of energy, emotion, and certainty. Others feel small, almost invisible, like they are not changing anything at all. And yet it is often those quiet, repeated actions that build the life you eventually step into. Persistence is what separates movement from transformation, because success is not built in bursts of inspiration. It is built in repetition, often during moments when you feel nothing is working, nothing is changing, and nothing is happening fast enough. At first, most people begin with motivation. It feels strong, almost unstoppable. You imagine a better version of your life, and that image gives you energy. You start taking action with confidence. But motivation is emotional. It rises and falls depending on mood, environment, and expectation. And when motivation fades, many people stop, not because they cannot continue, but because they were never prepared for the silence that follows early effort. The phase where progress is happening, but not yet visible. The phase where nothing external confirms your internal struggle. This is where persistence becomes essential. Persistence is not excitement. It is not emotional intensity. It is the quiet decision to continue even when feelings no longer support you. It is showing up when progress feels slow. It is repeating actions when results feel uncertain. It is staying in motion when everything inside you wants to pause. And this is where most transformation either survives or collapses, because failure is not something that only happens at the end of a journey. It is something that appears throughout it. Small failures, unnoticed failures, discouraging failures, moments where things do not go as expected, attempts that do not produce results, efforts that seem wasted in the moment. But failure is not the opposite of progress. It is part of it. Every failure carries information. It shows you what does not work. It refines your understanding. It strengthens your awareness. And over time, it quietly reshapes your approach. What looks like setback is often adjustment in disguise. Yet during the process, it rarely feels that way. It feels like delay, like resistance, like something is not meant to happen. And that is why persistence matters more than perfection. Because perfection stops when things go wrong. Persistence continues until things start going right. Think about someone building a new life, learning a skill, starting a business, or changing direction. The beginning feels promising. There is energy, clarity, and excitement. But as days turn into weeks, the results do not match the expectation. Effort increases, but reward feels distant. This is where most people quietly step back, not because they lack ability, but because they underestimate time. But those who persist understand something deeper. Time is not empty. It is cumulative. Every action adds up, even when it feels invisible. Every repetition strengthens a foundation, even when no structure is visible yet. And eventually something shifts. The same effort that once felt meaningless begins to produce results. Small changes appear. Opportunities begin to respond. Progress becomes noticeable, not because effort increased suddenly, but because accumulated effort finally reached a point of visibility. This is how transformation works. Not instantly, but progressively. And in that progression, discipline becomes more important than motivation, because discipline does not depend on how you feel. It depends on what you have decided. It keeps you aligned with your intention, even when emotional energy is low. Motivation starts the journey. Discipline continues it. Persistence completes it. And over time, persistence changes something deeper than your circumstances. It changes your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who does not quit easily, someone who continues when others stop, someone who trusts effort even when results are delayed. And once that identity forms, everything begins to shift, because now persistence is no longer something you practice, it is something you are. And from that place, success is no longer a question of if, but a matter of when. Chapter 10. Living as the creator of your future. At some point in life, the question stops being, what do I want from my future? And quietly becomes something deeper. Who am I becoming while I am living it? Because your future is not a distant event waiting somewhere ahead of you. It is being shaped, piece by piece, in the ordinary moments you often overlook, in the decisions you make when no one is watching, in the thoughts you allow to repeat, in the habits you excuse or commit to, in the way you respond to discomfort, opportunity, and change. You are not waiting for a future version of your life. You are creating it continuously. Most people imagine life as something that happens in big turning points, one major decision, one breakthrough opportunity, one moment that changes everything. But real transformation rarely arrives like that. It builds quietly, through repetition, until one day you look back and realize you are no longer the same person who started. And that is when you understand something powerful. Nothing in your life has been random. Every direction you have taken has been influenced by awareness or the lack of it. Awareness is the beginning of intentional living. Without it, life becomes reactive. You respond instead of choose. You repeat instead of redesign. You follow patterns instead of questioning them. Days pass, and slowly those days form years that feel familiar, but not fully chosen. But when awareness enters, something shifts. You begin to notice your thoughts instead of being controlled by them. You begin to observe your habits instead of automatically repeating them. You start seeing the gap between what you say you want and what you actually do. And in that gap, transformation begins to become possible, because you cannot change what you are not aware of. And once you become aware, every decision starts to carry weight. Not in a fearful way, but in a meaningful way. A simple choice to wake up earlier, to focus instead of procrastinate, to speak differently about yourself, to take action instead of delay. Each of these becomes a quiet investment into your future identity. Not dramatic in the moment, but powerful in accumulation. This is where manifestation stops being something you practice occasionally and becomes something you live continuously. It is no longer about sitting and visualizing a better life for a few minutes a day and then returning to old patterns. It becomes about aligning every moment with the direction you claim to desire, not perfectly, but intentionally. Because life does not transform through isolated effort, it transforms through consistent alignment. When your thoughts, choices, and actions begin pointing in the same direction, even slowly, something undeniable begins to form. Your reality starts to reorganize itself around that consistency, not because life is reacting to desire, but because you are becoming someone different through repetition. And repetition is powerful. It is the quiet force that builds identity without announcement. You do something once, and it feels like effort. You do it repeatedly, and it becomes familiarity. Eventually, it becomes part of who you are. This is how people change without always realizing it in the moment. A person who once felt stuck does not transform overnight. They begin by questioning their habits. Then they shift small behaviors. They start thinking differently about time, effort, and possibility. They begin making decisions that feel slightly uncomfortable but aligned with a better direction. At first, nothing looks different externally, but internally, everything is changing. Months pass, then years, and slowly, the version of themselves that once felt distant becomes their new normal. The old identity, the one that once felt fixed, starts to feel like a memory rather than a definition. This is how creation works in real life, not through sudden magic, but through sustained awareness and aligned action. And along the way, something important happens. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to change your life and start recognizing yourself as someone actively shaping it. That shift is everything, because when you believe life is happening to you, you feel limited by circumstances. But when you understand that you are shaping life through participation in it, everything becomes more intentional. You begin to take responsibility not from pressure, but from power. And with that power comes clarity. You start choosing what you give attention to. You become more aware of what influences your emotions, your focus, and your decisions. You begin to question patterns that once felt automatic, not because you are forcing change, but because you are finally observing it. And observation creates space, space between stimulus and response, space between thought and action, space between old identity and new possibility. In that space, you become the creator, not in a dramatic sense, but in a quiet, consistent way. You shape your mornings, and your mornings shape your days. You shape your habits, and your habits shape your direction. You shape your direction, and your direction shapes your life. And over time, life stops feeling like something you are reacting to. It starts feeling like something you are building. This is the final realization of manifestation. Not as a technique, not as a practice, but as a way of living. A life where nothing is separate from creation, where even small decisions carry meaning, where awareness replaces autopilot, where intention becomes presence, and in that state, you no longer wait for change. You become the reason it happens. Looking back at your life through a new lens changes everything. What once felt like coincidence now begins to look like pattern. What once felt like delay now reveals itself as process. And what once felt like limitation starts to feel more like instruction, quiet signals guiding your thoughts, your choices, and your direction all along. Nothing you experienced was truly random. It was shaped by internal patterns you were not always aware of. The way you thought, the way you interpreted situations, the way you responded to uncertainty, all of it contributed to the reality you lived. And now, awareness has entered the picture. Because change does not begin with circumstances, it begins with recognition. The moment you see how your inner world influences your outer world, something irreversible shifts inside you. You are no longer reacting blindly. You are observing, understanding, and slowly learning how to participate in your own transformation. You now understand something most people spend years searching for. The hidden system behind their life is not outside of them, it is within them. And that understanding carries responsibility, but also freedom. Because if your past was shaped by unconscious patterns, your future can be shaped by conscious choices. Nothing is permanently fixed. Nothing is fully defined yet. Every direction is still open to influence, still responsive to change, still waiting to be shaped by what you choose next. This is where your real power begins, not in wishing, not in waiting, but in deciding. The future is not something already written. It is something you are continuously writing with every thought you accept, every belief you hold, and every action you take. And perhaps the most important truth of all is this: you were never just a passenger in your life. You were always part of the creation process. Now you see it clearly. Life is not something you wait for, it is something you create. And the moment you begin to think differently, even slightly, your reality begins to shift in response. Think bigger, live better, achieve more.